So a script is just a fancy way to talk about, and I'm talking about in the MATLAB context here, but actually you'll hear this used kind of throughout the software engineering community. A script is just a text file that has a bunch of code in it that's meant to go together. I know that sounds stupid, but it's just a file used to organize kind of a bunch of code associated with what's known in software engineering as a particular workflow. So, and that's to be useful, right? Really, you can put any collection of code you want in a script. If you remember back to the last lecture video, I kind of went into my text editor and I entered a definition of, I think it was a column vector, and then I computed the sine of 90 degrees. That's two individual lines of code that I can combine together in a script. That's a valid script. It's just a script that probably doesn't make sense. To be useful, you want all that code to go together to achieve a particular function. And I shouldn't have used the word function because function is a little bit different of an ideal, but let's just call it a particular task. So it's a bunch of code in a file organized to fulfill a particular task. You can write it in any editor you want. You can write it in Notepad. You can write it in Word. However, if you write it within the MATLAB editor or another development environment that understands the syntax of MATLAB, you will get help. It will be easier to write in that environment. So when you have a script, you can take everything you wrote and you can copy it and just execute it in the command window. But that's a really inefficient way to do it. What you want to do instead is save your script as a file, and you want to call that file in the command window. And what that will do is take the command window, it will go and find the location of the script, and it will just execute each line by line. So, and as we'll see in a minute, if you're using the desktop application in MATLAB, if you have the script open and you have it saved, there's also a run button. So running the script can really be done in two ways. You can click that button or you can call it by name on the command line. So important note, you can run any script as long as MATLAB can find it. That's the advantage of hitting that run button. It has reference as to where that file is at, so it knows automatically. If you're just going to type it by name into the command window, the easiest way for MATLAB to know where your script is if it's in your current workspace. So think back to that last learning module that we did. We talked about the workspace in MATLAB, and I just said these are all the files in MATLAB that are on the current path. That's technically not true, but just view it as close enough to being true. Anything you call, remember when you have a folder on a standard operating system like Windows, you can't have two files of the same name in it. So naturally, everything's going to have a unique name. So if you just call it by its name, you don't have to tell MATLAB where its location is. It can find that automatically. So if you want to make scripts more readable, in addition to having actually code in there, you can have some kind of text that's not meant to be interpreted by MATLAB at all. And those are called comments. And in most scripting languages like MATLAB or high-level kind of interpreted languages, the way that you do a comment is by beginning a line with the percentage key. So let's look at an example problem. Let's create a script in MATLAB consisting of the following two MATLAB commands: A equals 34, B equals A, and then a little apostrophe. We'll see what's going on there. Notice that the first line is terminated by a semicolon. The second isn't. We want to execute our script using the two approaches described in the prior slide, and then modify it in order to put today's date at the beginning of the file. So let's do that. And I'm going to take and copy this code. Go over to MATLAB Online. I'm going to create a new script. So you can just click on this button here. I'm going to copy that code that I had in there. So you'll notice sometimes when you copy and paste, there's kind of additional information beyond the text that's going to cause errors. If you see that, just delete it and retype it. So if you notice, I just retyped the apostrophe. That's all I did. And all of a sudden that, let me actually show you that again. So how did I know that was a syntax error? If you notice, this is highlighted in red and underlined. And if I go and I mouse over that, it will say invalid text character. So apostrophe is valid. We'll see that in a minute. But it's just when I copied it over, it's not giving me the correct apostrophe that I wanted. So save that now. I need to save it, of course. So I will click on the save button. If you notice, by default, I will call this my script. If you notice, those are two words, my and script. I didn't use a space because that's just good convention when you're working in any type of computing environment. But I made the S capital in order to kind of offset and show myself that that's a new word. That's actually called camel casing. That's the idea when you hear someone say camel, like the animal casing, that's a way that you can kind of distinguish the start to a new word using variable capitalization. So I will click OK in order to save that. You notice now in my current folder, I have a file called myscript.m. I can now run this by either clicking the arrow, which I've done here, or in addition, I can just go down in the command window and I can start typing in my script. If you notice what's happening, as I start to type, I have an option to autofill. MATLAB knows that that's one of the options that I may want to do because there's a file named that in my current directory. I can either left click in order to autofill, or I can tab and it will autofill. But if I type the name of the script on the command line and I execute it, notice what is happening. I'm not seeing anything about A because that output is suppressed, but I'm seeing something about B. Well, let's go in our workspace and see what's going on. If you notice, A is a 1 by 2. So it's a vector again because we use the square brackets. However, since these two values, 3 and 4, aren't separated by a semicolon, they're separated by a comma, I didn't form a column vector, I formed a row vector. So A is 1 by 2. Now look at B here. The elements of B are also 3, 4, but it's not 1 by 2, it's 2 by 1. So what must have happened here, right? What this operator must be doing, this little apostrophe, is taking the transpose of A. Remember that the transpose of a matrix takes a row and it makes it a column if it's a vector. In a matrix, in general, it does that for every row or every column. So what's cool about MATLAB is oftentimes you can do things in multiple ways. So you can take a transpose with the apostrophe, or you can just type in transpose of A, and you notice you'll get the same thing. Here it's stored in my ANS variable. So whenever you're working on a script in MATLAB, the last answer is stored as a variable called ANS. So the last thing we were supposed to do is type in the day's date. So I'm intentionally doing this wrong. Don't have a heart attack. Today's date is 6/14. And if I do that, I'm going to get a bunch of underlines telling me I have syntax errors. Well, that's not meant for the computer to interpret. I don't want MATLAB to try to take that code and turn it into something that the computer can work with because it doesn't understand that syntax. So to tell it it's a comment, only for me, I'm going to initiate that line by a percentage sign. And if you notice, automatically the text goes to green. That's telling me that this will not be interpreted. Now, if I rerun my script, notice that nothing happens. It goes the same way because the only thing I did was add a comment, and comments aren't interpreted. So hopefully that was helpful to you, and I will see you in the next